Welcome to the CTO podcast. This time we have Stefan and myself, joined by Kathy Keating, Frank Febraro. We're all friends. Frank is in Portland, CTO Phase 2, Drupal shop, any shop. I guess you guys build anything for anybody.
Digital experiences that advance the human experience. Drupal's a part of what we do, but we do a whole heck of a lot more for our clients.
I figured. And Kathy is joining us from Denver area.
Mhm.
And Kathy has been a CTO around the block, VP of engineering, CTO, 10 people, hundreds of people, few issues, many issues. So Kathy is also an incredible contributor to the general CTO community through Techstars, through Rands, through just anything. What I love about you, Kathy, is I just feel like I can ask you the stupidest questions and you'll still make me feel very, very important for having had such an original thought.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Feel like I've definitely been around the block when it comes to being a CTO. But today I do CTO advisory and CTO coaching work.
I'll end off this intro by saying my puppy is still alive. Stefan, I was able to keep the dog alive for a whole week. I guess I can put that on my LinkedIn profile.
Yes, definitely. Did you say it's a
Last week,
strudel?
a schnoodle. Last week, Stefan and I were showing our dogs to each other, which was, I think that levels up the relationship, right?
Yes. Again, definitely, yeah. But yeah.
Welcome to the CTO podcast, a show dedicated to all the brave humans showing up in technology leadership roles around the globe. Every week, we'll help you keep track of the stories you missed, the trends that might pass you by, and talk to people that shape how we should show up as Chief Technology Officers. I am your host, Etienne de Bruin, founder of 7 CTOs, and joining me as always is the creator of amazing CTO newsletter, Stefan Schmidt. Let's go.
So I want to start with a story which is called How to Do the Thing You've Been Avoiding. And the article is about the author who dreads doing things in his head and then he doesn't do them. And he has one example where he interviews Jimmy Fallon and they have a very nice talk and a nice interview. And when they part ways, and Jimmy Fallon says, "You can call me, drop me a line, ask me a question afterwards." And after some time, the author thinks, "Well, I have a question." And but he dreads asking Jimmy Fallon because he thinks, well, Jimmy Fallon is a very busy guy, and I have just this one question, and I don't want to annoy that person. But after some time, he asks a question, and surprisingly for him, Jimmy Fallon is it's very happy that someone takes up the offer and asks a question because people seldom do. And learning for the author is that what he imagined that Jimmy Fallon would do is totally different from what the person really does. And I've seen this with my coaches and with other managers in the past that you don't want to do something because you think the person will react negatively in any way. For example, one of my coaches wanted to promote a senior developer to a team lead and thought, oh, probably team lead position is not something for him. I need to convince a person. There will be some arguing. And then he talked to the person and the senior developer says, well, splendid. I want to become a team lead. That's great. So it was totally different reaction than the CTO imagined in his head. And that happened to me in the past several times too. So I thought that's a powerful thing that might block you, and a different mindset will unblock you there.
Yes, I love that because as I'm building 7 CTOs, clearly I'm talking to people that I don't think want to hear from me when I do follow ups or when I am trying to approach someone. Stefan, even when I tweeted you, there's always this thing about, well, how do I come across? Do people want to hear from me? And a close friend of mine once said to me, whenever I reach out to people, I should always assume that they want to hear from me, that they're excited to hear from me, that they are a friend of mine. And not only does that help me reach out to them when I have that positive reframe, it also changes the tone of how I reach out to that person. And so I don't go into this, I'm sorry that I'm bothering you mode, which none of us want to hear because we get 50 of those emails every day. But we want, your brain is sort of piqued by, oh, wow, this person is talking to me like a fellow human being or like a friend. I was encouraged in some cases to even write emails like you would write a text, short sentence, like just a little thing that you send to somebody. And that has been a game changer for me and addresses, I think, the same mental block that the author talks about in this story.
I think as humans, we're wired to do scenario planning. We want to make something happen. So we start to run through all the scenarios in our head. We even maybe subconsciously start to evaluate all the pros and cons of every scenario. But I think the challenge we have is we start to believe some of those cons, like, oh, if I send this thing to this person, they're going to hate me or they're not going to like me or they're going to, distrust me if I say something that they don't want to hear. The challenge is when we go from like just evaluating pros and cons unemotionally to getting wrapped up in one of those cons actually being the truth that's going to happen. And so that preys on our fears. And so, then our fear turns into fact in our brain. And so then we don't do the thing. And I wonder what would happen if we just stopped at the pros and cons, evaluating the scenarios of pros and cons and said, okay, well, this scenario has the most upside. So I think I want to go take that scenario and really just take the fear out of it. And I love that saying, feel the fear and do it anyway. Like, hey, maybe this fear is unrealistic and maybe I shouldn't think that it's going to be the fact.
Yeah, I think the saying is courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. Yeah, this is something that I actually work on with my coach quite a bit. Um, it's basically, the stories that we're telling in our head about who we are. And, it's like, could really go into like therapy kind of things because you're just bringing up all the stories that you have from your youth and all sorts of things. And you refer to it as like someone's going to come after me with pitchforks. And even though I have like a long list of times when that did happen, and maybe not even a single time where it did happen, my brain still goes back to that time and time and time again. You have to get really good at the courageousness of it, at being afraid that that's going to happen, but being curious as well, what would happen if they don't come after you with pitchforks? How good would things be if you try it and it goes exactly as you hope it would?
I love that. Also playing out the scenario, what is the worst thing that can happen?
And don't imagine there's something I made a mistake for a long time. Imagine that people are the same like you are, like in like other developers or something. Just because they are developers, they are very different. And I made the mistake that I'm very competitive, and I thought that for a long time made a mistake that I thought that people that are not competitive are not motivated, kind of, until 20 years ago, something a trainer said to me, Stefan, people are motivated without being competitive. And then I said, oh, well, okay, might be true. So I think there's a lot of problem arise if you think that people are just like you.
I also think it's interesting as technologists, like, we're like, we embrace like learning from the failures of our projects, right? Like doing things, having it not go well, how do you adapt to it? But when it comes to some of these other things, like doing something that you're intimidated by, or you don't feel good at, or, professionally or not, you don't adopt that attitude. You tend to shy away from it as opposed to just like embracing what could I learn from this? When we signed up for these jobs that we're in, we signed up for all the outcomes, right? The good ones and the bad ones. And you don't really get to control necessarily which ones happen. But you have to be open to what they all might be. And I think the real test of who you are as a leader is how you respond to all of them, the bad as well as the good.
Okay, so I think what's going to be most helpful for us about that topic So, Stefan, otherwise I'm going to have to try and make the conversation sound normal, or and Kathy's audio is going to sound off. So let's start the whole thing again from Stefan introducing story. You
I
good with
can,
that, Stefan?
well, I can, I could barely hear you.
Really?
Yeah. Could you please
I'm suggesting that we restart the story.
from the start?
Yeah.
So okay, no problem.
So bring that same energy, that same like novel joy.
No problem the second time. Will be a problem the fifth time, perhaps, but okay. So fifth time, no problem. So we're talking about AIs and then, but video doesn't work. So sure. That's a state of, okay. Um, so I want to start with a story which is called How to Do the Thing You've Been Avoiding. And the article is about the author who dreads doing things in his head and then he doesn't do them. And he has one example where he interviews Jimmy Fallon and they have a very nice talk and a nice interview. And when they part ways, and Jimmy Fallon says, "You can call me, drop me a line, ask me a question afterwards." And after some time, the author thinks, "Well, I have a question," and but he dreads asking Jimmy Fallon because he thinks, "Well, Jimmy Fallon is a very busy guy, and I have just this one question, and I don't want to annoy that person." But after some time, uh, he asked a question, and surprisingly for him, Jimmy Fallon is very happy that someone takes up the offer and asks a question because people seldom do. And learning for the author is that what he imagined that Jimmy Fallon would do um, is totally different from what the person really does. And I've seen this with my coaches and with other managers in the past that you don't want to do something because you think the person will react negatively in any way. For example, one of my coaches wanted to promote a senior developer to a team lead and thought, oh, probably team lead position is not something for him. I need to convince a person. There will be some arguing. And then he talked to the person and the senior developer says, well, splendid. I want to become a team lead. That's great. So it was totally different reaction than the CTO imagined in his head. And that happened to me in the past several times too. So I thought that's a powerful thing that might block you, and a different mindset will unblock you there.
Yes, I love that because as I'm building 7 CTOs, clearly I'm talking to people that I don't think want to hear from me when I do follow-ups or when I am trying to approach someone. Stefan, even when I tweeted you, there's always this thing about, well, how do I come across? Do people want to hear from me? And a close friend of me, a close friend of mine once said to me, whenever I reach out to people, I should always assume that they want to hear from me, that they're excited to hear from me, that they are a friend of mine. And not only does that help me reach out to them when I have that positive reframe, it also changes the tone of how I reach out to that person. And so I don't go into this, I'm sorry that I'm bothering you mode, which none of us want to hear because we get 50 of those emails every day. But we want, your brain is sort of piqued by, oh, wow, this person is talking to me like a fellow human being or like a friend. I was encouraged in some cases to even write emails like you would write a text, short sentence, like just a little thing that you send to somebody. And that has been a game changer for me and addresses, I think, the same mental block that the author talks about in this story.
This comes up for me a lot when I'm coaching. I think as humans, we're wired to do scenario planning. We want to make something happen. So we start to run through all the scenarios in our head. We, even maybe subconsciously start to evaluate all the pros and cons of every scenario. But I think the challenge we have is we start to believe some of those cons, like, oh, if I send this thing to this person, they're going to hate me or they're not going to like me or they're going to, distrust me if I say something that, um, they don't want to hear, right? And so the challenge is when we go from like just evaluating pros and cons kind of unemotionally to getting wrapped up in one of those cons actually being the truth that's going to happen, right? And so that preys on our fears, right? And so, then our fear turns into fact in our brain. And so then we don't do the thing, right? And I wonder what would happen if we just stopped at the pros and cons, evaluating the scenarios of pros and cons and said, okay, well, this scenario has the most upside. So I think I'm going to go take that scenario and really just take the fear out of it. And I love that saying, feel the fear and do it anyway. Like, hey, maybe this fear is unrealistic and maybe I shouldn't think that it's going to be the fact.
Yeah, I think the saying is courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. Yeah, this is something that I actually work on with my coach quite a bit. Um, it's basically, the stories that we're telling in our head about who we are. And, it's like, could really go into like therapy kind of things because you're just bringing up all the stories that you have from your youth and all sorts of things. And you refer to it as like, someone's going to come after me with pitchforks. And even though I have like a long list of times when that did happen, and maybe not even a single time where it did happen, my brain still goes back to that time and time and time again. You have to get really good at the courageousness of it, at being afraid that that's going to happen, but being curious as well, what would happen if they don't come after you with pitchforks? How good would things be if you try it and it goes exactly as you hope it would?
I love that. Also playing out the scenario, what is the worst thing that can happen?
And don't imagine there's something I made a mistake for a long time. Imagine that people are the same like you are, like in like other developers or something. Just because they are developers, they are very different. And I made the mistake that I'm very competitive, and I thought that for a long time made a mistake that I thought that people that are not competitive are not motivated, kind of, until 20 years ago or something. A trainer said to me, Stefan, people are motivated without being competitive, and then I said, oh, well, okay, might be true. So I think there's a lot of problem arise if you think that people are just like you.
I also think it's interesting as technologists, like, we're like, we embrace like learning from the failures of our projects, right? Like doing things, having it not go well, how do you adapt to it? But when it comes to some of these other things, like doing something that you're intimidated by, or you don't feel good at, or, professionally or not, you don't adopt that attitude. You tend to shy away from it as opposed to just like embracing what could I learn from this? When we signed up for these jobs that we're in, we signed up for all the outcomes, right? The good ones and the bad ones. And you don't really get to control necessarily which ones happen, but you have to be open to what they all might be. And I think the real test of who you are as a leader is how you respond to all of them, the bad as well as the good.
Okay. So next story is titled Cleaner Accidentally Ruins Decades of US College Research by Turning Off Freezer. And it's about a cleaner in a lab in a college who turns off the freezer and ruins 20 years of research. And it has a lot of it for CTOs in it, I think. Doesn't sound on the surface like it's relevant, but I think it's highly relevant. And it also reminded me of my time in the military, which was only very short in Germany. And I was a part of an airport, air base, which did training. So we had all the newest stuff. And I wanted to get into a plane, just sit there. Like I want to get into a plane. And it took a lot of time until I got into the plane. And with military intelligence and all of that stuff. And then I finally got into that plane. And then there was a cleaner cleaning below the plane. And I'm very sure that cleaner didn't go through 6 months of vetting like I did. So that's totally funny. And I've also met a cleaner in a very top secret research installation, and I'm sure they also didn't go through all the vetting. So I think it's interesting where cleaners show up. So then I was a little bit reminded on that with this story. But coming back to the story, the the cleaner went into the room, obviously, and the freezer was making some kind of alarm, and the cleaner was turning off the circuit breaker, and the freezer went off. So that's a simple story. But as we all know, in a crisis, as startup for CTO, there's always a lot more to unpack when something goes wrong. And in this case, the problem was that there was an alarm and they couldn't fix it. So it was beeping, and they put a note on it. Beeping is okay, but the cleaner thought beeping is not okay. So I need to turn off the circuit breaker. And they even put the lock on the power outlet so you could not unplug the power from the freezer. But well, they didn't take the circuit breaker in consideration. So there, I think there's a lot in this, and it's also reminding me of the sci-fi time travel things where you try to prevent something, and then the exact same thing you try to prevent happens because of your actions. And the story sounded like that too. But for a CTO, I would ask, was this your way to prevent a crisis? Is this your disaster recovery? Is this your business contingency planning? Putting a lock on the power, and why has the freezer? Why are there no two freezers? And why has the freezer no battery if there's 20 years of work in it? This sounds, I know it sounds ridiculous, but if I talk to startup CTOs, they are just like that. There is no backup. The backup is not tested. They have ridiculous rituals to make it work and something. It's just like this story, I think.
Yeah,
So I think that's
it reminds me of the script that posts to Slack's private channel. Remember to check the offsite backups, and that's the alarm. That's the little, and then it just gets posted every week, and then everybody just gets put to sleep. Like,
Yeah.
oh yes, I guess someone did check the backups. Well, we got the reminder, so the system's working.
Or it
Just
reminds me of the unit tests are always failing, and you just kind of train your developers to always ignore the failing tests and just focus on the tests that they're working on or something.
yes, don't worry about all those other tests. Just make sure your code's tests are pass. Yeah.
I'm reminded about how, as companies, as we're putting out features, we always say, okay, well, X could happen, Y could happen, Z could happen. Let's plan for all those things. So they put the lock on the cable, they put the signs on the freezer, and they even trained the staff, right? Or trained the owner of the cleaners that this was going on. But no matter how much we contingency plan, our users will always do something that is completely unexpected, right? And you're like, how did you break that? We did comprehensive testing. Well, I clicked here, I clicked there, and then I went there, and it broke, right? And we're like, oh, I didn't plan for that path, right? And so I think it's a good reminder to us that no matter how much we can plan, there's always going to be pathways in which our software is going to be used in a completely different way than we anticipated. And so, as leaders, we have to be thinking out of the box as often as possible, and also building as many contingency plans as we can.
Yeah, and I think the thing that comes to mind for me also is around threat modeling. The threat modeling exercise, which we tend to say, what are the external threats that my organization faces from NetSec, AppSec, InfoSec? But then we neglect to do the same threat modeling for internal threats.
Yeah.
And I always think about whenever you bring in that third-party developer or the quick project that this consultant is quickly going to help us with, that is comparably now the cleaner, right? The super access to the whole building. because all they're going to do is clean the floors, and I'm reminded of, how are your IM profiles set up? How did you lock down your Confluence or your Notion documents, to be able to, and these, like you said, these are all things that you tend to, Stefan, you mentioned, especially in startup mode, you tend to think you deprioritize all those things until that actual issue comes up, and you most likely get fired because your whole system went down.
Yes. I was nearly there. I was started at a company as a CTO, and then there was a fire alarm. Everyone left the building. We're standing in front of the building. Firemen were going in and looking for what's happened. And I was very new at the company, and I asked a DevOps guy, "Where are our backups?" And he said, "In my desk." And then and it was some 30 very uncomfortable minutes until it's like firemen came out and said, "Oh, it's not, building's not burning, false alarm." And I thought, well, I'm a happy guy. That could have been the company right at that moment. So
Well, let's move those backups out of your desk tomorrow.
Yeah.
yeah, it was a little bit difficult to getting everyone running because it was, they had a lot of photo studios and it was kind of couldn't upload to the cloud. So there were some challenges, obviously, but yeah, we did that the next day, something more sensible than putting the tapes into the desk.
There feels like there's something with like role-based access control here too. I mean, cleaners having access to the circuit breaker. I mean, maybe the vacuums trip the circuit breaker, but I think there's something with least privilege access that we could do there.
Yeah, the thing I would like to ask you guys is, what is something? How does one proactively address this? There is the boring, like, once a month, I don't know, check everything. Then there's sort of the chaos monkey side where you artificially create chaos and see how the team deals with it. But assuming most of our listeners are sort of, mid-level to smaller companies, overworked, under capacity, do you have some tips on just how can one proactively stay ahead of the game?
Well, I mean, this was incomplete scenario planning, right? They put a sign on the door, and they assumed there's two things: you're either going to open the door or you're going to unplug it, right? But in their scenario planning, they didn't realize power could be taken away from the refrigerator through the circuit breaker, right? And so I think for us, as we try to reduce risk in this, we need to think about like what's 100% of the ways in which the power could go away from this refrigerator. Instead, they only thought of the two that were top of mind, right? And so I think that's for us as we go into scenario planning for risk is to think, okay, what are all the ways, right? And of course, more voices there are at the table, you're going to get more ways. What if only one person did this scenario planning? And then they just didn't think about that thing. But if they had two other people helping them, maybe they would have.
I love it.
Yeah, I wonder what else the lab was doing. Like they might have lost 20 years of research in that freezer, but there are other freezers with like 50 years worth of research, and they had planned just for, like that might have been the least critical resource in the entire operation.
I try to address this often with the CEO. I gave a series of talks about what CEOs need to know about IT. And I think they often treat this as a black box, but I try to encourage CEOs to ask some questions to the CTO, which essentially concern the security or the survival of the company. So you don't need to know about software development processes, but I would, as a CEO, try to manage the CTO in a way that at least the stuff that could blow up and cost me the company are managed properly. And surprisingly, this is very seldom done. So
Yeah.
at least in this companies, up to 2 or 300
Yes.
people, it's very seldom done.
And what I love about what Kathy said was to have more voices around that table to address, well, what do you think can go wrong? And then ha 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 about the asteroid. But then when you get past that silly conversation, you actually maybe do unearth 2 or 3 really important things that maybe the tech team didn't think about. So I think that's a great idea. And actually, I'm inspired to actually say, hey, I'm gonna a few companies I'm helping. I'm gonna say, hey, let's all get together, and I'm gonna share this story with you, and let's all come up with what do we as a company think could potentially sink us. I love that. It's a really morbid story to start us off with, Stefan. Because now I'm really worried about
I
all
don't
my.
know. I don't know I don't know what this research was. I mean, hopefully
Maybe
not cancer research.
maybe it
It
was the
said it
cure.
was,
Maybe the cure for cancer was in that
Yes,
refrigerator.
yes. Then that would be.
I think it said it had something to do with photosynthesis.
Yeah.
Dude, you know what? This was the cure for cancer, and then Big Pharma brought in the CIA, and they masqueraded as a cleaner, and they got access to the building, and they just
All right. Enough of the what if making stories up.
I have
cool.
one more. And then you see, like a lot of the stories are unconventional. Kind of. I try to find things that are relevant in some way that are interesting to me and relevant to the CTO, but not in an obvious way. Like
I love it.
I don't know, why is Svelte better than Angular or something like that? Sometimes that's in the newsletter, but I try to not to have these. The next one would be the unfair game when VC funding turns into an evil empire. The idea of the article is that VC funding with the succeed whatever it costs mentality leads to stuff like board article kind of it's not saying the article is not saying that, but bribing people and stuff like that. And what I thought interesting, and why I brought it up, is that I thought a lot about the difference between VC and bootstrap companies because I've been in VC companies. The startup my wife has been bootstrapped, and one of the huge differences I've seen is that companies with a lot of money in the bank can do a lot of gray things, whereas when you're bootstrapped, you try to be very white in what you're doing. So for example, a competitor was spending a small company, but the competitor was spending $10,000 a month on legal fees, something which we could not afford. So you can be much more aggressive in some kind of gray area around emails or around websites, or perhaps we see this with cookie banners or stuff like that. And this is how that story resonated with me. Yeah? Big difference is if you have a lot of money, you can be more aggressive in some ways.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
I love this is one of my favorite stories that you had on your list today because I've worked in Bootstrap and I've worked in VC backed as well, and I think our perspective is so different in those kind of businesses, right? Almost everything we do as a startup is experimentation, right? But a VC backed company that is let's say flush with cash can run a lot of experiments that can fail. Their failure rate could be 50% or whatever. But a bootstrap company, their experiments, they need a high percentage of them to succeed. And they need that success to drive the desired outcomes like revenue gains or customer gains that they need to be able to continue to sustain as a company, right? So we need a much higher percentage of our experiments to succeed, and we need them to move really fast. So I'm reminded of a company, a VC-backed company I know that spent 2 years building their first MVP because they had the cash to go get it right. By the way, they went out of business about 3 months after they launched because other companies just beat them to the market. And then the bootstrapped competitor to this same company, we built, and I was at the bootstrap competitor, we built concept to launch in 3 months and we were cash flow positive in 7. and they hadn't even launched yet, right? And so it's just the perspective of two different companies doing the same thing. One with VC money, one bootstrapped, like in a completely different approach to being out into the market and ensuring that the experiments that we run had the best opportunity for success.
Yeah, I think about this in terms of the David and Goliath stories. You know, I feel like the VCs are building Goliaths, and the Davids are like the little 1, 2, 3 person shops that are, hey, this isn't a super impossible problem to solve. Let's see if we can do it, and then magic happens, and then then they run into some problems which I think money can fix, which is we need more people. We need to do things. But I think I'm always bothered by the game that VCs play, which is the numbers game, right? Like we know that our portfolio is only going to produce one unicorn and maybe 2 or 3 great exits. So let's invest in 100 of these companies. I've always felt super uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, um, the the mindset I think, Kathy, that you're talking about, which is there is definitely a paradigm shift in a company when there's a lot of money to spend and you have to spend it, versus um, we have to do more with less, and so where can we be as most efficient and lean as possible, and that has to have an impact on the creativity, the lust to survive, the types of humans that show up. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I also think of you had mentioned the money game or the math of all of it. I think about it a little differently too, in terms of, the VCs are obviously they're willing to spend the money and invest in order to get to the exit that they want, but they also need it to be of a certain size, and of a certain scale for it to make sense for them to do it. And in a lot of cases, there might just be a boring business there that could make a great living for the team, that isn't really going to give the VCs the return that they're after. And they might just be willing to pull the plug on that or do something different when, there's a good business to be built there. It just might not give them the triple digit returns.
But
Now, don't
I
get me
love what
wrong.
Kathy said.
What's that? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just said I love what you said because it's so funny that the thing that uh, the VC, it's essentially seen, a lot of VC see themselves that way as an accelerator to accelerate things with money. And what you said is like the money slowed down the company. And this is also that I've seen in some companies. Like I talk to people, we're 2 years old, we spend 5 millions, we are nowhere. And so that I thought that was incredible. Like I give you money to speed things up, and the effect is I slow things down. That's
Yeah, and I think maybe that's a failure of leadership, right? Like, how does leadership wield the tools that we're given, right? Sometimes VC money is the only way a company is going to be able to thrive. I think of in the health tech space, just standing up the third party tools you need, it can cost you millions, right? And so a bootstrap company can't stand up that on their own, right? And so sometimes the money makes sense. The challenge is VCs give money to companies, but the VCs that doesn't come with the advice, the strategic advice about how to wield that money well, and who's holding those C-suites and those founders um, responsible for wielding it smartly. And some of these people are, first-time founders. They have no idea what they're doing. The VCs that are advising them have never been an operator, so they don't know how to advise properly, right? But where are the experts that are advising these companies on how to wield it well? And how are the founders leveraging those experts as
Mm,
advisors, right? And so I think that we're just not, sometimes with the money doesn't come a good support system for how we
mm.
leverage it for success.
And for me, it's the adding of money and adding of the people drastically increases complexity. And so, how are you able to deal with that? And I think that's why you often see founders or CTOs who they just know how to work with a $10 million cash infusion. Like they just know how to deal with that complexity. That's why you have 5 times exited founders who they just know how to deal with it. But that's not the majority of people. And so I think a majority of people inherit a complexity that they just cannot deal with. And it's even worse, I think, than just advising them through it. It's just that the brain has to now deal with, I always get very afraid when I hear, oh, we have to hire 100 people in the next 3 months. And I'm just like, wow, you're only 20 people now. That, the, apart from the hiring funnel madness, the complexity is exponential. And the company that you're going to be at the end of the hiring of the 100 is not at all the company that you were when you were 20. And therefore, the leadership, the people involved, the systems, the process, everything gets blown to pieces.
Perhaps we need to write an article how to deal with a lot of money, and
I,
that's.
I
I
al-
worked with.
Go ahead, Stefan. Go ahead.
I worked for 2 companies. I worked for a lot of companies. I worked for 2 companies. Which one was a real estate website in Germany, the biggest real estate website in Germany, and they had high margin, lots of money, and they created. I think it created a lot of problems that there was so much money. There was always enough money for everything. And then I was some years later. I was working for eBay, which I greatly enjoyed working for eBay. But one of the problems there, I thought also there was too much money. It's so perhaps so I would need to write an article how to deal with too much money or something like that.
Yes, and I'll just
Don't have that on their. They don't realize that could be a problem. How could
yes,
too much money be a problem? A lot of money be a
yes,
problem.
and what I want to just cap the story with is as someone who built 7 CTOs, we discuss issues inside of forums. So we have 6 or 7 people in a group, and we bring our situational issues to each other. Let me tell you, one of the scariest, most terrifying things that I have seen CTOs go through, where you can see the whites in their eyes and you can see them short breaths, hyperventilating, is not, hey, I don't have enough cash to do what I want to do. It's we just got too much cash and I can't spend it fast enough. That is the most terrifying thing I have seen CTOs go through,
Absolutely.
because we have gotten to where we've gotten by doing more with less. We are geniuses when it comes to dealing with scarcity, and if we have to, we'll roll up our sleeves and code the thing ourselves. I mean, there's always ourselves to fall back on. But we find it very hard to be in an economy of scale where all of a sudden your CEO and the whole board is looking at you like, hey, we've given you used to have a 200K budget. Now you have a $10 million budget. Go make something happen. And I have seen plenty of CTOs fail miserably because they can't handle that. Cool. Feel like that's a stunned silence. Like,
I'm reminded of our first story that we talked about where you don't do the thing, right? Because you're in overwhelm and you're afraid, right? So it all kind of cycles back to that first story.
and I wanted to just mention this, Stefan. You and I talked about a story 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago where the whole Elon Musk firing everyone at Twitter syndrome,
Yeah.
where VCs are overcapitalizing maybe and just hiring too many bodies, and how the Reddit CEO found admiration in this approach that Musk took, which was, hey, you used to be 500 engineers, now you're going to be 12. So regardless of your personal opinion about that, it is possible that the VCs have been fattening startups in maybe the delusion. We got to go hire all the best grads from Stanford. No, you don't. You don't have to do that.
Well, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The VC has the big bag of cash, and that's the tool they know how to wield. So more of the good thing is not always better, but they might not see it that way.
Yeah, you're trying to buy knowledge, buy people who are experts in certain areas, right? And of course, you're using bad decision making to do that, or bad profiling. But like, I'm reminded of Zapier. Zapier, I believe, has only taken a seed round, and then they got to profitability, and they've grown off of their profitability, right? And so there's just too few companies focusing on getting to that profitability number. And some companies intend never to get to it, right?
Yes, I think I heard some company who was like 12, 15 years into the game was like, this year we plan to be profitable. I'm like, wow, man. Wow.
Yeah.
That's good stamina.
Let's before Kathy's got to bounce, because if Kathy bounces, we'll have to end the whole call, because Zencast is probably going to go batshit crazy.
Yep.
But let's just talk about this last story, because that looks fascinating. Stefan.
Yeah, I have the last story is there's a shop opening at OpenAI, and it says nearly 1 million for a developer yearly salary. It's 2/3 stock and only one-third money, but OpenAI seems to be some kind of successful company. So I think the stock is not something you might lose. And still, I think the number is staggering, because I hear a lot of things about how the market is worse for developers. There have been the layoff waves and some stuff like that. But then you read like something like 1 million per year for a developer.
Yeah, this got me a little confused because OpenAI, I don't think, is publicly traded, right? So
Nope.
how can you put a number on that stock? So that was just a little confusing to me. And also when I looked down at the multiple people, I with different years of experience, I realized they're paying everyone the same salary, base salary. But people are getting different option levels as well. So like a 5-year equates to 800, and a 10-year is to 925, although they both have a base of 300K, right? So is this funny money? Is that 2/3 stock funny money? Obviously maybe OpenAI will go public or get acquired at some point, and we'll know how much that stock component is worth.
Well, by having the stock option plan, they certainly have to do their 409A every year. So there is, I mean, even though the market isn't liquid, there is a price per share that is attached to it, and I guess they're assuming growth of that over some
Yeah,
time.
maybe.
So that's how I would value it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Do we feel this is out of, I'm not in that San Francisco area. Do we feel this is out of alignment with other companies in that area?
It's a good question. It's certainly a lot bigger than what I've heard. I know that many years ago we had to stop hiring people in the San Francisco area because they would get offers to go work for the big tech companies at like 300% raises. And we were just like, well, can't match that. Good for you though. You should certainly take it.
Come back when you're bored and when you put the name on your CV and you're bored and want to work on something real again, instead of think about how to deliver it, and then come back and have the name in your CV.
I mean, the great news is these people are going to the source where, OpenAI is getting a lot of the attention right now. So these developers are going to the source. They're getting experience from the source that is kind of acting as one of the big thought leaders in this area, right? And great, because we need more people that understand how to wield generative AI and large language models. And so as they start to migrate away from these OpenAI roles into other companies, those other companies are going to benefit from this experience, right? So,
Yeah.
I think it's great that that they're hiring more people. And then I think 2, 3, 4 years ahead about how the rest of us will benefit from it.
It connected a little bit to my first job, or my first real job, kind of. My first real job was in a startup, which called itself Virtual Laboratory, and you could essentially, they had a webcam. It was 1990 something, and they had a webcam on the machine, pointing at the machine, and you could see how your chemicals are synthesized. You could put it on the web and say, yeah, I want this and this, and then you got a mail, and you clicked on the mail, and you could watch how it's synthesized. And and I was hired to write the software and the label printer and all of that thing. And I thought about, and then they wanted to increase this, and I needed to write more software. And I talked to the lab assistant, and she said, well, otherwise we would need 4 more people. You write the software, I can do the job. Then we don't need these 4 people, and I was well paid. And I thought it was the first time I said, okay, I get the money, and so obviously these people don't get, these virtual people that should have been hired don't get the money, so I'm well paid. I was quite a lot younger, and that made some impression on me back then. And I think it's a little bit here too. It's a kind of funny meta level. I don't want to overplay, but it's a kind of meta level that developers work for OpenAI to work on AI that writes code and replaces developers, kind of.
Yeah,
And they get a lot of money to do that because,
I thought it was.
I was a little bit reminded
Ye-
of myself.
yes, I thought it was interesting that the job title was member of technical staff. Yeah, I think where I'm a little hung up on is this investment we make in people, and then knowing we have to create a system that can lose those people.
Can you
And then
can you
if
talk about that a little more? A system that can
well,
lose those people?
well, I'm thinking of if you're a startup CTO, you're investing in your developers, you're doing everything you can to know that you can lose them at any point. And are you afraid of that? And then, therefore, do you lead sort of from a fear-based, where they have leverage over you, so to speak? Or do you lead from confidence and joy that if they do leave, your system is intact?
And I think there's another aspect of that too, which is like, do you care about those individuals as people and what are they leaving to go do?
I'm going to say that I want to ideally be in a situation almost like I want my children to come talk to me about crazy topics. Uh, I would like my employees to come to me and say, "Hey, man, I'm really enticed by this thing I saw, or I'd love to go down to 4 days because I want to work on my hobbies." I think that kind of relationship, especially maybe in smaller companies, I ideally want to have that. And I can feel the shift in my own leadership style when I feel like they hold the keys over me, like I'm dependent on them to show up and deliver and code and fix and build and blah blah blah. Versus, hey man, if you choose to leave, I have built a system of people, of an organizational system that can sustain the blow of you leaving. Two very different scenarios where in how you show up as a leader. And I have felt both, definitely have felt both modes, the fear-based mode versus the celebrate my people mode.
Yeah. And in growing a company, as you're growing it, I think you'll start with a lot of the fear of when folks leave, like, oh, we'll never be the same company. They're taking so much knowledge with them, yada, yada, yada. But, I found, but my experience is like an N of one. I found
as that's happened, we've realized that, oh, we persist. We've built the systems. We've continued to grow. We've been more successful, not because they left, but in spite of them leaving. And that gives you the confidence to then believe that you can be a place that is not beholden to any individual, including
And that,
yourself, hopefully.
yeah, and that energy is a force in the organization, and I believe it's an attractive force.
Absolutely. Do you think, I'm thinking back to our last story and applying it here. I mean, I noticed one of these roles is 5 years of experience, base salary of 300K. Do we think this might be an example of too much money in the system? And uh, I have too much money and therefore I'm going to spend it. I mean, I don't know any 5-year experienced software engineer making 300K base, right? At least definitely not in Colorado where I'm at, right? So what does that do to the system when we overpay inexperienced talent? And then, the way I've seen this is when talent gets overpaid beyond their experience, eventually they get pushed out, right? But then they have expectations that they can make that salary elsewhere, but they don't have the skills to kind of like back that up. And so I think
Mm,
it's a brittle system when we do this,
mm,
um, to just really incent these people beyond their skill set, and
yeah,
then they fail.
I feel like there's a bait and switch happening there. Like, entice them with a 300K and deal with the follow-up questions later. Like, you're on a website, you see the salary, you're like, I can do this, and then you go and have the conversations, and then the enrollment starts.
Right, and then
Uh,
you end up with a salary of 150 or whatever.
yes, because like, hey, we can't do 300K now, but why don't you start at 150, and then you'll be with OpenAI, and the stories will be amazing. You'll be an ex OpenAI when you go find your next job. I know we're out of time, so I want us all to hit stop before, and that all the uploads can happen before you all leave. But do you just want to say goodbye?
Yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really love how all the stories tied into each other.
Stefan's really good with this. I love this. I can do this all day.
Yeah, this has been great. I hope to be back someday.
Yeah, we'll see if you make the list, brother. Stefan, Stefan and I have very, very high standards.
Yeah.
Stefan, und wie hat es dir gefällt?
Mir hat es sehr gut gefallen.
Wunderbar.
You're going to translate that on the
I hope so.
the video.
I just like, I liked it very much.